Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our webinar on Generation Z at Work. I'm Alex Hattingh, and I head up People and Culture here at Employment Hero. And I'm absolutely thrilled to be joined by Dan Fish from GO1 and Michael Osmond from JobAdder. Now, here at Employment Hero, we're always really curious to understand Australia's workforce. And now we have this new Generation Z joining our ranks. So we wanted to understand, what are the consequences of this generation? So we commissioned research through YouGov into Gen Z, and we're here to get advice from both Dan and Michael on what our findings were. So I'd love to start off by having Dan and Michael introduce themselves.
Thank you very much. Dan Fish and GO1. Wear a couple of hats, currently heading up strategy there. Been with the organisation for around 4.5 years now, so since inception. Been very privileged to work with a lot of smart people there. Prior to that, spent about 8.5 years working at Seek, so this area of career and education is something I'm passionate about and know a little bit about now. GO1 is a training platform. Easiest way to sort of think of us is Spotify, but for education and learning. It's one of those things where we want to be able to provide the most effective and efficient solution to get the most access to the right content at the right time and in flow. So, very excited to be here and talk about the Gen Zs.
Cool. So, Michael Osmond, I am the People and Culture Manager at JobAdder. I've been there for just going on 6 months now, and it was brought into the business by the CEO in a startup people and culture role. Very much my focus is looking at driving processes and supporting our leadership team. At the core of it, it's very much around focusing on getting better performance and better outcomes out for the business at the end of the day. If I'm not doing that, I don't think I'm doing my job well. But before that, I was at a national governing body for sport, Football Federation Australia, for a couple of years, and before that was in a HR generalist role in financial services at a mid-tier accounting firm. But on the topic today, always interested in the generational research. We don't specifically have anything in place that would target particular generations, but always interested to see how we naturally fit into some of the approaches to be able to attract these people, but how we can improve it as well.
Fantastic. Thanks, Dan and Michael. Looking forward to your insights today. And I promise we didn't coordinate the black and white t-shirt. It was just a coincidence. So let's get started with some of our findings into Gen Z. So Gen Z are really ambitious. However, they're completely unsure about where they want to go next. So our insights report showed that 37% of our young Aussies are working in their desired career, yet 22% of them say that their career aspirations are the highest priority in their job hunt. But there's something wrong here. There's a bit of a mix match between the ambitions of our Generation Z employees and the fulfillment of those actual career ambitions that they have. So, Michael, I'd love to throw to you. Do you have any recommendations on how we can better maybe align career aspirations for Gen Z during the hiring process?
Yeah, I think, when I saw some of these insights when I was preparing, think back to obviously how we're applying it at JobAdder and what's worked well. And I think what has helped is our CEO, just naturally as a person, is quite transparent and honest. And I think taking from that, when we're recruiting people into the business, we've been quite honest with them about what the opportunities are, where the business is at. So we're not setting any unrealistic expectations. But that being said as well, when we're quite honest and transparent, there are a lot of opportunities for progression as well. So I think upfront, being honest with the people that we're bringing into the business, but also prioritising career progression internally, not just saying that we offer opportunities for that, but if someone has a career conversation like someone was having with me on Friday, we generally put in a lot of activity and effort into trying to find them something that works for them. And staying honest and transparent throughout that process as well. Our CEO before my time was quite good with that as well, where he's a bit of a visionary, so see where we will have needs down the track and maybe put someone into a role that they'll develop into being able, into a team where a role hasn't started yet, but he can see the need for that in the future. where in the past it would be, in my experiences with other organisations that I've worked in, a bit more reactive, where it's we don't have a need for that in the business, we don't have the budget. So, and thinking a little bit outside the square in terms of how we can provide those opportunities for our staff, where they may not need a role for that right now, but that doesn't mean we can't give them exposure to that, whether that's through, a couple of hours a week, a couple of days a week, or some side projects where they can get some exposure to that without having to completely move into a new role.
That's great. I love that. And that's really good advice, especially when you don't have a ton of money or a whole lot of budget. So that is a perfect segue into kind of our second finding from our insight study. And that is that Generation Z really lack career direction. They also talk about money being an issue and poor culture. And it's causing young Australians to jump ship. Would you believe, as we speak today, a whopping 30% of Gen Z workers are looking for a new job? So Dan, I'd love to flip over to you. You've had years of experience of managing people, and with this new generation coming through, how do you keep career development kind of front and centre for them all the time?
Yeah, I think there's probably a couple of key themes to this, but one of the big ones that I see and that I think we see at GO1 is this concept of personalisation. More now than ever, we've got access to data and signals with this new Gen Z coming through. So we should be in a better position to be able to respond effectively and efficiently, and not just surface the same experiences, whether it's onboarding, whether it's training, whatever that might look like, that has been done time and time again. So I think the big thing for me is this concept of personalisation, and with that comes the idea of not just for the candidates or the people themselves, but also organisations, because what we're going to start to see is organisations needing to look in other areas and other ways and explore other avenues to engage this personalisation process. So, it often means uncharted territory for organisations, because you'll have your tech stack within your own organisation, whether it's sort of sourcing candidates in or managing them once they come on board. But you're also going to need to start looking elsewhere. What else are these Gen Zers doing, whether it's in their own personal time, whether it's in professional time, so that you can actually start to build up a holistic view of what's important to them, where they want to go, and actually what that longer career life cycle looks like. I think this is out of date now, but the average lifespan of an individual at an organisation is about 3.5 years. Or thereabouts, and so the reality is there's a number of different organisations that those people can go through in their whole career, and so I think those organisations that are less risk averse and are able to start considering the fact that these employees are either coming from somewhere or they're certainly going to end up going somewhere is really critical, because that means you're actually not just to themselves, but organisationally you're actually putting your money where your mouth is and highlighting the fact that we know that this individual may not be with us forever, so we want to try and work with them at this particular point in their career, but also importantly, whether it's through access to training and future skills that they need, show them firsthand that we're actually committed to doing this. And I think that's one way that we see not just helping to define and shape what that career looks like for them, but giving them the feeling that actually the organisation is looking to support, not just in the traditional ways, but things that I'm interested in even outside of work, and whether that's sort of project stuff that they can be pulled into later or whatever. But I think that's a really good way to show meaning to that. Yeah,
no, that's such a good point. And even here at Employment Hero, I'd love to see so many companies get to the point where we give employees the psychological safety when it comes to their next play. If you're a small to medium business, you might not have that job ready for the employee. So opening up the safety for that employee to say, you know what, Dan, my next play is not here. Can you help me find it outside the company? I'll help you backfill me. And then that way you're having someone leave, go and get new skills. They're a brand advocate, and hopefully one day they might come back.
And I think that's the key thing. The brand advocacy component is going to be so critical, because there is a social component, I think, to the Gen Zers. They are out there connecting in new and different ways. So if you're not thinking around that brand advocacy, specifically around this topic, it can be damaging.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So moving on to the next finding, and that is that flexible work really matters to our young Australian workers. Now, we know this is not new, and all research shows that flexible work in 2020 is a trend across all Australians, no matter what generation you're in. And the reality is that sometimes our younger workers might end up in workplaces outside their desired career. And this is especially true of the younger Gen Zs, where they might just take the first job that's offered to them. So if we can think outside the 9-to-5 box and allowing people to work from home or hot desk, certainly these days, people have interests outside of work. They want to go to the gym at lunchtime. They might want to leave early if they have a young family to be involved in those kinds of things. So, Michael, what's your advice on showcasing flexible working to attract candidates, or anything else around flexible working?
Yeah, I suppose our approach, which is quite refreshing in a lot of parts of the business, is treat our staff like adults. I had in my previous role a lot of flexibility that was showcased, and we needed to push that as a benefit because we couldn't compete in other areas that say Gen Z were looking for in a new role. But we can provide those at JobAdder, but treat people like adults. We really want to see our staff. We want to create an environment where they come into work every day. So I've got an interesting take where I think too much flexibility in terms of too much remote work, I think, can be detrimental to culture. And I know prior to my time, our founders were looking at entirely remote work for the entire business, and they decided that was too much of a risk to culture. We aim at the moment to provide staff for flexibility to design their day however they want to do that, but in terms of working remotely for those that are based, say for example in Sydney, in headquarters 1 day a week, because we want people there, we want people face to face. As you'll see, and in the findings, they like face to face contact. We want to create an environment that's vibrant where they like to come into work every day. So we don't want 3/4 of our workforce at home a lot of the time. But that being said, we have staff that want to travel, they want to move internationally, and they still remain with the business in their roles as well. So we can accommodate that, but largely, we want people in there face to face. We do push family first as well, so that comes first. You do what you've got to do. We just want to see you most days for a lunch, for parts of the day, you design the day how you need to as well. It's interesting, and I agree with that, how a sacrifice to culture could be if we went, entirely with a lot of the office working remotely for big periods of time.
It's definitely a risk. And Dan, for you, I know GO1 is absolutely known for providing flexible working and remote working and being great around that. Mm-hmm. What are your recommendations as a manager to stay connected to people who are working remotely and from home?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I'm going back to sort of the Gen Z report piece. I read one, I think it might have been July, I'm not sure, but whilst they've, there's not really been a generation coming through that's been sort of more tech savvy or connected, there is also a very human-centric approach with them. They want to see people, they want to talk to people, which actually makes a lot of sense when you think about the fact that they've sort of grown up immersed in technology. They sort of crave that human touch. And so I think for us, it's very similar. In regards to making sure that we connect people. So some of the stuff that we look to do is, each quarter, there's a series of additional stuff outside of our OKRs and KPIs that we put in place where we'll facilitate the movement of people from different geographies, say London or the US, to pick a country that they'd like to visit and then go there and spend anywhere from 4 to 12 weeks in that office working through and experiencing the different culture, different atmosphere, different ways of doing things. So I think that element of flexibility where we can take people out and put them in different geographies and experiences is really, really important. Mm-hmm. The flexibility one's tricky, I think, as well. There's a ton of stuff that we do around sort of, to the point earlier about compounding work weeks, or currently exploring the idea of sort of unlimited leave, or there's a lot of people talking about that. But I think ultimately we also need to be quite mindful of the different role types and even beyond GO1, the different types of industries that people work in, because I got interviewed recently around the flexible workplace piece, and it's not always applicable for every role, and that's the challenge, I think, more than ever. People go, oh yeah, but we're a shift working business, we can't have people just not working from home one day. And the challenge there is that through things like technology and just sort of an openness of thinking, more organisations should just challenge what the traditional view of flexible workplace is. and think about it in a different manner. And that example that we gave earlier about rewarding those people that are really living the values and giving them time in different offices is maybe a good example of that. And that could be a different department in a shop or whatever it is, but just to actually spend some time being serious and investing. Because I think that the flip side of that is that you can talk about flexibility, but if you're not serious about it, applicable to your industry, it comes across as a bit weak. So.
Absolutely. And I completely agree that it's different for different teams, and being really upfront in the interview process I found really helpful.
Yeah.
A really good example is here at Employment Hero, our sales team rarely work from home because they learn from each other, they get coached by their managers, but we're really upfront during the interview process. If you're interviewing for a sales role, whilst we do support flexible working when needed, the team actually prefer to be in the office for doing that.
Absolutely.
And we've also found here at Employment Hero that having your leaders really espouse or show an example. So having our CEO, if he's leaving early to go and pick up one of his kids after traveling, he'll actually say, guys, I'm out of here, I'm going to pick up Henry because I've just gotten back from a trip. So having leaders really kind of, speak to it and give those examples is really a big one. Okay, so let's move on to the next one that came out of our Insights report. And that's one that still has a little bit of stigma around it, and that's mental health. So it's absolutely another trend for 2020 across all generations. However, our report showed that mental health support for Generation Z isn't a nice to have anymore, it's an expectation. So a whopping 75% of Generation Z workers expect their employers to offer mental health support. It's no longer a bonus, it's something we have to invest in. So with mental health awareness skyrocketing, it is fundamental for our Gen Z employers, to stay on top of it. It's also really vital in attracting and retaining high quality Gen Z workers. So flipping back to you, Michael, and JobAdder, how would you recommend supporting mental health and making it part of your employer brand proposition to attract that talent?
And well, first and foremost, I'd say this is definitely a work in progress for my team at JobAdder and the leadership team there as well. It's funny that that's come up. That's a big March focus for the people and culture team. But I think first and foremost, we're like society, and we have staff that are affected by mental health. And I have these conversations with leaders within the business in terms of they start thinking we need to be mental health experts, and we're not currently, we might not be doing something at this stage. And I have the practical conversations around we're not experts in mental health, but our managers and our people and culture team need to be able to identify signs and be able to support them and push them into the right direction as well. So I think recruiting people who are good people who care after each other helps create an environment that will support people when they're going through mental health. I've been in previous work environments where there are external pressures from media and things like that, where it's very high risk. We're a bit more fortunate. It's a really good place to work where we are at the moment, but surrounding, where people like to come into work because that's helping them, become healthy again. But I also think preparing the organisation for that is our leaders, whether, we want to recruit leaders who are highly emotionally intelligent, they have a high degree of empathy. They're what I look for in really strong leaders. And if they don't, but they're in leadership roles, let's coach them through that as well, especially our young leaders as well. But it is a work in progress, but I think it all comes back to keep treating people well. If you've got the flexibility and we can support and educate people, I think we're taking steps in the right direction.
And I think the education piece is a critical one, and something that we're really passionate about, both internally and actually as part of our business offering as well. I mean, I was very lucky to work in a number of different organisations over my career, from Save the Children to See, that take mental health incredibly seriously, as we do at GO1. I think we've sort of taken that one step further now, where part of the content, part of our ecosystem, where we're working with fantastic content partners, we're also now looking at working with sort of non-governmental, not-for-profit organisations and some for-profit organisations that are starting to crop up in this mental health space. People like Mindstar, people like Beyond Blue, people like Lifeline, where we can actually work collaboratively with them to take that messaging out in a more effective and efficient manner. whether it's through sort of the Mindstar Academy or content that Beyond Blue and Lifeline have helped us pull together. That's sort of the first step in trying to erode some of that stigma that still exists. And you only need to sort of look at some of the numbers. I think it's something like 3.9 million people affected and 1 million people are sort of slipping through the net. That's a huge amount. And so part of that does come with stigma. Part of that comes with how and what to do. And I think part of what we're serious about is, as part of that compliance and professional development sort of suite that is a must-have, so too must some of this social impact piece, and mental health is right at the top.
Absolutely, yeah. Thank you both. And product plug here, GO1 is actually part of Employment Hero, and I can't recommend it enough for the content that it brings together. Going back to Michael's point around supporting leaders to give them the tools to deal with things such as mental health and having those conversations, which can put you in a really vulnerable space as a manager or even a co-worker. Having something or a resource like GO1 to go to for your managers to give them courses, so that they're not having to say, hey, Alex, I have no idea how to have this conversation. You can just direct them straight to a GO1 to say, these guys have more than 50,000 courses that are sourced from all sorts of incredible places. Log on, take a look, take a few courses, and it really gives them the skills and the tools. It's definitely something I think that's going to continue to trend, and the need for organisations to allow people to bring their whole selves to work is something that's really trending. So moving on to the last big one that came through on the Insights report, the second last big one, and that's work-life balance. And again, it's nothing new and it's nothing that's kind of mind-blowing, but if you forget the work environment, the most valuable thing to Gen Z is work-life balance. So 10 years ago, the work environment was the buzzword. Ping pong tables were cool. Free food was great. That's kind of expected now. So Gen Z workers don't want to be bugged on weekends. They don't want to be having to get emails at 8 p.m. In fact, they quite often log off and you won't even hear back from them until the next day. So how do you guys recommend or talk about, I like to talk about it as work integration or life integration rather than balance, but how do you deal with it in your companies?
Yeah, I think it's funny because I read an interview with Jeff Bezos last year, and he sort of hates the term work-life balance. I wouldn't quite go that far, but I think I like the summary you were giving a minute ago. I think it's around, and it kind of comes back to this personalization piece, right? Like having a decent understanding, because everyone's different at the end of the day, and to try and always apply a one-size-fits-all approach is difficult. And I think, again, there's no real excuse for doing that now, given the tech stack and the functionality that we have at our fingertips, whether it's through, JobAdder, Employment Hero, or other systems that are sort of slightly outside of the work tech stack. There's an opportunity to be able to be a lot more informed and driven with regards to what these people need and want. And I think, even linking back to the mental health piece, I think, there's a critical component to that work-life balance piece, which is about switching off and is about disconnecting, because it's, so difficult these days to do. And, I've got friends that will literally remove their Outlook app from their phone when they go on holiday, just so that they're not tempted to pick it up and look at it. And I don't, at the end of the day, I don't actually think that's necessarily, I think it's an organizational leadership position to take, but it's also just part of the technological evolution. It's just something that becomes habitual, and we need to think about smarter and better ways that we can support our people in being able to do that. And I think a lot of what we've already talked about does loop into some of that stuff, and it's making sure that people are taking breaks, whether it's a holiday or just an afternoon off, and really being considerate to that. I think the other piece as well comes back to something I was talking about, again, underneath that personalization piece, where we're looking a little bit further outside of the work ecosystem. And from a learning perspective, I talk about it all the time. It's this formal versus informal learning, where we're actually starting to be able to capture what that employee is interested in outside of work. And sometimes that's not always going to be pertinent, but then sometimes that is relevant. And as I said earlier, there might be a project, I might be working in HR, but there might be this really exciting project that data science is doing. I've actually spent the last 12 months reading about AI and ML. I'd love to be a part of that, and giving the organisation the sort of insight into the individual, but also allowing the individual to have some of their broader interests outside of work start to come in. And I don't mean that, you know, all of a sudden we have this blend of work and life and it's hard to tell the difference. But I think, you know, again, when I think about the formal and informal learning piece, I think there's a massive opportunity to look at what these the Gen Zers are doing out in their normal lives and how that can be applied, both for the benefit of the employee, but also the benefit of the employer.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And I'm a big fan of looking at performance as, you know, holistic performance of an individual. So I mean, I've always said that if someone's struggling at home, they're not going to come into work and then just deliver and nail it and then go home and struggle again. They're going to, you know, it overlaps and you're dealing with the entire person. So the way I try to capture that when we're looking at performance, we set objectives for our staff, and we have 3 that are linked to their team and around, you know, team's performance, one that's linked to their own individual learning and development, and one that's a personal goal. And we measure on that. That's incorporated into our performance framework that we're just rolling out at the moment. But in terms of, part of those objectives could be around, for example, myself, work-life balance. I've got a 6-month-old at home, and I need to lead by example a bit more with that. Looking at work-life balance at JobAdder, it's keep pushing the family first values, and you do what you need to do, and we want to see you, and we'll see you when we can. But for individuals, and telling them up front, your manager's not responsible for your work-life balance. They need to support you within the parameters we've given them, but you need to be accountable for your own mental health and your own work-life balance. So don't sit back in 6 months and say you would have liked X, Y, Z. Be accountable for it, and put in place what you need around your own balance at home.
And I think I like what you talked about earlier in the conversation around treat people like adults. I mean, you know, it's that situation where, I mean, likewise, you know, having sort of daughter's a little bit older, she's about to start high school, but, you know, if I'm away traveling quite a lot, and so subsequently means that I miss the school drop off or pick up. So making a commitment that whenever I'm here, I am there to be able to do that, and the organisation, you know, as an organisation, will support our people sort of wholeheartedly. And it's giving people, I mean, there's so many ways to be able to monitor and check on performance. You sort of, it's almost like you don't want to not trust someone until you're given a reason, but you also need some parameters in place to be able to work with them on that. So.
And those parameters, I think, when I came into the business and was consulting with our team leads, everyone was very supportive of it, but it was giving them confidence to make decisions, not to say, don't make a decision in this situation, but here's, you know, you can do this, you can have the confidence to be able to make a decision on that and make a call on that, because, you know, you've got our backing. When, you know, it wasn't that's not available to our staff. The manager's like, oh, can I make those decisions? We're like, well, here you go. Here are the tools.
No, it's such a good point. Accountability, empowering your employees, but also training your leaders. I think I've certainly found over the years, a lot of leaders are a bit old school, and they're like, if you're not seen at your desk, then you're not actually working. So using tools like KPIs and OKRs to make sure things are output driven is really important, as well as giving people that empowerment, as you both mentioned, to leave and go and do what they want to do. And with Gen Z, they might not yet have families, so we can't discount the importance of fitness or other passions they might have outside of work. So giving them permission to leave early for a 4 p.m. gym class, for example, is exactly the same as someone else going and doing, you know, kids drop off or pick up. So moving on to the next insight, and that is that Generation Z really want to like their job. So when considering whether to accept a job, our insights found the top question: 49% of Generation Z workers ask themselves, will I actually enjoy this role? So do you guys have some advice on how we can actually make sure people are enjoying their jobs when we're talking to them in team meetings, one-on-ones?
Yeah, so, and it was interesting when I was reading this insight as well. We did some work on purpose with the leadership team when I joined about 6 months ago. And, you know, we did a big marketing, a big whiteboard and brainstorm in terms of what's the purpose, you know, JobAdder, why do we come into work every day? And then we went away and came back, and the CEO sat down with myself and some other leaders, and he said, you know, the original purpose of the organisation was to make a great place to work. And people want to come in and work every day. And the spin-off from that is we can look after our clients and have really good products. So that was quite refreshing from a people and culture perspective. So then our focus is very much making sure that people love coming into work every day. But my take's a little bit different in terms of, I would see, and it's a little bit of a generalisation, Say, for example, our engineering team and our development team are really engaged with the work that they're doing. And the culture of the organisation is sort of a second priority. We have people that are in a lot more client-facing roles who their first priority when they made the decision to join the business was around the culture of the organisation, and the work that they do there, they're engaged with as a second priority. So it is a generalisation, but I see that coming through. So we need to be able to create an environment where they like coming into work every day and we're supportive, but they're also contributing and doing meaningful work where they can tie to the purpose of what they're doing. So in terms of making sure that we're making the best talent acquisition decisions as well, and I think the honesty and transparency up front, instead of trying to oversell to get talent in the business, and they come in and they're sort of saying, this isn't the role that I've been sold, let's be honest and transparent, so they come in and they're going to like it from the get-go.
Yeah, I think that's a massive, there is this holistic, and we keep using the word, I'm mindful of that, but there is this holistic journey that you want to take, and it actually does, I feel it does start with talent sourcing, because, it's, there's some responsibility on both the organisation and the individual once they're on board, but there's a massively important step to take, and transparency is one of the key parts that unfortunately doesn't always happen, where you're setting out this trajectory on, this is what we do, this is the role, this is the expectations, and here's how you can grow. I think we're really lucky at GO1 where, for me as well, one of the big reasons why I joined is that it works in an industry that I'm deeply passionate around, which is education. Whether at a societal level, it's the major eradicator of all, social injustice, poverty, disease. And so, whilst that's a very macro view of the world, it's actually a way that we can sort of, highlight to people what's important about working at GO1 beyond the ARR and the monthly active users, etc. And I think a lot of the journey starts at that point. Like, you'll very quickly filter out people who are, either just focused on the dollar or the aspirational component. So I think there's a really critical part to that liking the job bit, which is the selection up front. But then again, and I sort of harped on about it already, but there's this real focus on personalisation, like being able to take that employee on a journey and committing to that. And that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to require more time than historically would be required. It's just being mindful and aware of, okay, well, this person's joining us, we can see what they've done in the past, or they've done a degree here, this might be a stepping stone into something else. So how are we going to set up a framework that makes sure that while they're here, they're learning, they're enjoying what they do, they're dedicated and committed to what it is. And again, sort of getting outside of that comfort zone, which is, well, thinking about the next step for those individuals, or thinking about the right move. And that might be a promotion within the organisation, but it might not be. But I tend to believe that when we, as a company, focus on not just what's right for the employee, but make that a priority, a lot of the light component falls into place because they feel like they're being supported, they feel like they're being nurtured, and they are a focus for the organisation.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. Thank you both. And I couldn't agree more. I think it's so much to do with the hiring process, where you're starting and you're making sure that you're really clear about the purpose of the company and you're testing that candidate. Does that purpose kind of resonate with them? And are they going to want to come to work every day for that purpose? And then when they're here, taking them on that journey as their roles evolve. And something we've started to do more recently here at Employment Hero is to tell more customer stories, so that we're linking everyone's role back to what we actually do for our clients and our customers, which we find pretty meaningful. Thank you both. Julia, I think we might flip over to Q&A if we have any.
Yeah. So hi everyone. If you just look down the bottom of your Zoom screen, you'll see a little box that says Q&A. As we go through these, if you want to pop in your questions in there, I will be moderating them, and we'll get through as many as we can while we have these guys with us. So the first question we have through is from Rochelle, who asks, hi there, the resistance from my company for working remotely is ergonomic workspaces in the home. We are a large business. Do you have any advice on how we could sell this without extensive costs to the business?
Yeah, sure, I'll take this one. And recently we've been talking about this in terms of putting a contingency plan in the horrible event that someone here should get coronavirus and we may actually have to shut down our entire operation, have everyone work from home. And certainly we'd be more than happy to provide this resource. And that is a working from home document where you're making sure the employee has an ergonomic space set up in their home that they agree to, that it is ergonomic for them, and it's up to them to set up whether it's their dining dining room table, but just making sure that it's somewhere separate in their home where they can have a laptop and or a monitor if they want one, and a phone as well. And getting them to agree to that being in their home is just a really important piece to the puzzle, to also make sure you're showing them that you care about where they're working should they need to work from home.
We do, so just a little bit about, so we've probably got 25% of the business that would work remotely, maybe a little bit more, and the large chunk of those would be internationally. But the way we sort of support the remote work is to, like you said, but we'll order the ergonomic equipment for them, and that'll be provided within a package and a sign-on when they start with the business. So we're making sure that that equipment is ergonomic, and they're using that, and that applies to everyone, and that's consistent across the business. It's not a massive cost to JobAdder when you're looking at, especially the cost of, say, desk space in Sydney. So I think if you can position it that way, as well as also what the other benefits that the remote that the business will get from keeping those remote staff engaged with the business and staying with the business. You don't want to be losing talent because you're worried about the workplace health and safety concerns for people working remotely. You want to keep them within the business as long as you can, and they might end up moving back into a face-to-face space. But I definitely think there's ways to accommodate it.
Yeah, same. I think it's just having a framework in place to capture. I mean, again, you want to believe that your staff and your employees are sort of adult enough to understand the dangers of unsafe workspaces. But I think just having a document to capture that and what that looks like, and just giving them some direction so they know, is massively beneficial. So,
cool. Thank you. We have an anonymous question who asks, can you please share some more specifics around your organisations and what they're doing around supporting employees' mental health? So I know we answered that a little bit.
Yeah, I'm happy to kick off. I mean, that we, as I sort of talked to earlier, part of our experience in mental health, and actually more broadly on a social impact level, we work with a few different organisations, whether it's CEO Challenge around domestic violence, and we're learning as we go, and we're learning about what's important at a societal level and what's important to our people and our organisation. So it's a little bit easier for us in the technology that we have enables us to really effectively deliver meaningful training to those staff members as and when they join. We also have allocated individuals within the organisation who are equipped to be able to work with some of this stuff. I think there's definitely more for us to do, and there's some fantastic organisations out there that can really help with this. And one of the things that I'd suggest, and happy to sort of provide some information afterwards, but there's a handful of great partners that we already work with that are thought leaders in this space. And without meaning to do the sales pitch, they are the subject matter experts. And if there's question marks around what it is that you do, or should we be doing more, they are more than willing to reach out and help with that. I mean, the stuff that we've learned from them along this process has been fantastic. And, a lot of it also comes down with just day-to-day operational pieces. Again, like with that, take a break, make sure that they're not feeling constantly bombarded. They're always, slacking someone at 11:30 at night, so they feel like they've got to respond. There's just some really simple steps that don't have to cost the earth, but that just, it's a mindset shift for the leaders in the organisation itself. So,
and I think, once again, so we're a medium-sized business. It's a work in progress. My experience in the past with things like employee assistance programs in the organisations that I've worked in haven't, I wouldn't say they necessarily haven't worked, but we probably had a 5% uptake for quite a significant cost. I could see the benefits of them, but some practical steps that I take in sort of smaller businesses where we're generalists in people and culture, and is around the upskilling of leaders and trying to upskill our staff as well, and letting staff know that we're not the experts. We're going to support you by doing this, and let's point you in the right direction to who the experts are, and you'll get the best advice from them. And let's keep checking in with that person as well. So yeah, that's kind of my experience with a medium, sort of
Yeah.
small to medium-sized business.
And I think the really pertinent point that both of you brought up then is that piece around observing a behavioural change in an employee, or noticing that someone's on Slack at 11:30 at night or 4 a.m. in the morning, and making sure you're alerting the leader or the manager. You know, Alex has been online a lot lately. Her vacation leave balance is ridiculous. Probably time you mentioned that she has a bit of time off is a really good example. On the flip side, we've had a really good experience here with our employee assistance program at Employment Hero. And I actually think that's been through word of mouth of good experiences of other employees who have had issues. And that's where managers might cap out and kind of go, I'm not really equipped to continue this conversation with you, Alex. Thank you for sharing it with me, but you're going through a few personal issues. Please reach out to this confidential professional counselling service and we will fund those sessions for you. So we've certainly had a great experience with them.
And I think it's on that point, and there's technology out there that facilitates this, but it's also talking to the people ongoing. Like, you'll get the best insight. Certainly our best insight has been on how we can iterate what we do in this mental health space directly from our people. So, you know, not everyone, there is unfortunately still stigma attached, and not everyone feels super confident bringing it up with their manager or more broadly. So being able to create safe spaces for individuals to feedback and to get that constant feedback loop running, so that you can learn as an organisation and what's working with us.
Yeah. And back to Dan's point, not just working with these great organisations out there, but also celebrating days like Are You OK Day, I think really opens up the door and gives employees permission to, you know, you don't feel comfortable talking to your manager, how could you? So there are other people in the organisation that you can talk to.
A bit of a quick question. Anonymous asks, would you allow Gen Z who's in their first role to start working remotely immediately or after their probation is up?
I'll talk through our approach, and yeah, it was sort of some middle ground that we came across. As I mentioned, we're going from a mindset where the founders were looking at an entirely remote organisation. So we've settled with, and this is just what we find kind of, you know, works for JobAdder. If there are people that are recruited for headquarters to be there face-to-face, we say the guidelines for managers to make decisions around an entire remote day is one per week, but also, you know, structure your days around the rest of the week, like any other adult would. And the guideline we sort of say is not until after probation. So that, as I said, that was the middle ground. I was happy with where we got to. You know, I can't see a reason why once someone's gone through the onboarding process that they couldn't immediately. But because, you know, and I led by example for that. So, you know, for the first 6 months followed that as well. But, you know, structuring your day how you need to. But, you know, if you're employed to be there face-to-face, as a guide, we work towards sort of one day. But, you know, we'll have staff that'll do a lot more. We'll have staff that just want to be there every day as well. So I think you need to customise what works for the organisation, but you definitely need the more flexibility, the better.
Yeah. I mean, I think the key thing with this is, sort of as I alluded to earlier, is not to be too prescriptive. Yeah. And actually, if you start to apply old logic and patterns to an organisational sort of structure for what flexibility looks like, it just becomes insincere. So it's really the more forward-thinking organisations are the ones that are looking at what they're doing, how the teams work, and the most sort of diverse and effective flexibility plan that will work. I think from our perspective, there's to your point about the employer taking responsibility and the employee taking responsibility. We'd never say no, but I guess from my perspective, the view is, like, especially during that onboarding process and where you are a bit of a sponge and wanting to absorb, it's critical, to your point earlier, about sort of getting us face-to-face and talking to as many people as possible. But then again, you know, if it's a single parent that needs to be on time for pick-up, or they can only get their child into 3 days a week, it's just about looking at logically what makes sense and supporting the individual and the organisation to make that work. And, you know, again, it becomes deeply unhealthy if you become too prescriptive with this, because you're going to lock people out and lock people in. And I think, you know, it's difficult when you're an organisation with 100,000 people. I get it. But that's not to say that you can't work divisionally to try and execute on some of this stuff. And certainly at that sort of small to medium-sized sort of business should be a lot easier as well.
Great, thanks guys. We have another question from Julie, who asks, how do not-for-profits compete with the corporate sector in terms of meeting Gen Z expectations on limited budgets?
So I was previously working at a not-for-profit, and we're looking at our employer brand at the moment. And it's a much less stressful exercise, I suppose, in terms of, the value for them for working for the organisation. So we needed to be more creative in the way that we looked at the value that, that employees would get to come and work for the not-for-profit. We were quite fortunate that it was in sports, so they were connected. 99% of the staff are die-hard football sports people, so they were connected to that, but we couldn't just rely on that for the length of however long their tenure was going to be. And not-for-profits would, generalisation again, but not be able to match sort of salary-wise, and often there's budget restraints as well. So in terms of structure and promotional opportunities, there weren't as much, and in sport there's not a lot of turnover, so you don't get a lot of roles popping up internally as well. So we really had to push the flexibility piece, and I said that will be a productivity gain for the organisation that won't cost us anything. So that was what we leaned on, where we could offer something, the link to the organisation, which not-for-profits can pull on in terms of the purpose, and the flexibility were the two things that we really pushed during my time there.
I mean, I spent almost 7 years in child welfare, so both from Bernardo's here in Australia, Save the Children back in London. So there's a few practical things, salary sacrifice, etc., that not-for-profits are able to do to actually, whilst on paper it might not look competitive, actually it is competitive to certain salaries. So any small not-for-profit looking at sort of how they do that, and if they don't have the salary sacrifice scheme set up, definitely look at that type of thing. Again, I think it comes back to something that we talked about earlier, which is taking a really sort of broader view on the potential employees and what's of interest to them. And for me, I'll give you a tangible example. I mean, I wouldn't be sat here now if I didn't have that broader view and exposure to education, or a lack thereof, and what that brings to society, if I hadn't spent time working at some of these organisations. Now, I cut my teeth in advertising, went into the not-for-profit space, came back to the sort of corporate sector, but the lens of the world that more often than not working in some of these fantastic organisations gives you is just very difficult to get at a for-profit organisation because of the way they see the world. And I think if, as a not-for-profit, that's something you should absolutely be proud of, sing about, and really, but like with for-profit organisations, you still need to make sure that you've got aligned people. And that's not to say that someone who's passionate about the environment couldn't work in child welfare, but you'll have the same issues that a for-profit organisation will have. But I think there's a lot of things from an employee brand perspective that you can talk about to attract the right people. But also more, and certainly in the 10 years that I worked in it, and subsequently since, there's some incredibly innovative, entrepreneurial, sort of agile, all the buzzwords, charitable organisations out there that are doing some incredible work. And I think, again, with technological advancement and some of the ways that they see the world, they should be almost in a better position to attract people that are sincere about their approach and what they're passionate about than for-profit.
I think thing to add there as well in the not-for-profit is to consult with the staff and see what, for that particular group, what they would want, or considering, and we used to say to our staff, considering that we're budgetary restraints, what would keep you within the organisation, or what would be a benefit for you that you would value the most. I think, so consult with the staff, definitely.
Yep.
Cool, thanks team. Balak asks, what kind of information should you provide to Gen Z to clarify their expectation from them and of the organisation? What are some key questions to ask Gen Z as part of the recruitment process to find the alignment?
That's a great question, and I think we could probably spend another hour answering it. I'll go first, and I'll be quick. I would certainly start by asking your candidate during the hiring process what interested them in your organisation, and that's all about being purpose-driven. You don't want someone joining your organisation because you've got ping pong, free food and beers on a Friday. That's kind of a perk that really is a given. However, you would be surprised at how many of the younger generation who've never worked anywhere before do expect that. Similarly, if they're asking about flexible work in their first interview, I think that's a bit of a red flag. It's also about looking at and assessing what questions they ask you. Yeah. If they're asking you really insightful questions, they've done their homework and they're interested in working for you. And I think that's a really, really key thing.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. We were chatting to some friends at LinkedIn last year, and you know, they were asking us through the hiring process, what's the most important question you ask? And actually my response was, well, have you got any questions for us? Because there's sort of nothing more telling during that process, and you'll get the most meaningful data and insights out of giving them the opportunity to be asking you questions. So I think, you know, again, it also comes back to having a sincere approach to the candidate and the individual and the future employee, and make it, you know, not that you need a template or a pattern that can be applied to every individual, but at least allocating the relevant time and energy to be able to sort of look more holistically in ways that you capture that, and whether it's feeding it into your HR system so that you can track it ongoing and it then becomes part of the performance piece broader than just performance itself. Like, there's a number of ways to do it. So.
And I liked, quite refreshing, I went to interview at JobAdder, so still at the front of mind from 6 months ago, and sat down first with financial control, but then with the CEO, with no notes, lots of eye contact, and had a genuine conversation. And at the end of that, I thought, oh, that was a really good conversation where we sort of cut back the crap and the template and talking about the business, when you should really know about the business when you're coming into the interview, and definitely about, you know, what do they know about JobAdder front up, and why do they want to work for JobAdder. But I think, and when looking for quality sort of Gen Z staff, we heavily in the EQ space and getting in to know people and asking them about, you know, how do they manage stress? You know, do they ever will they talk to former, say for Gen Z, people that they've gone to university with, stay in contact with them, and sort of, you know, what frustrates them as well, and to try to get right into knowing the person and why they want to work for that organisation up front, instead of getting caught in some of that red tape that we know wastes a lot of time in interviews.
Which is a great point around, you can teach someone who's really smart skills. And LinkedIn last week came out with a bunch of trends at one of their events, and soft skills are coming out as being absolutely the most desired skills going forward. So I think it's about those questions aligned to your values of your organisation. So if you're looking for someone who's a really good team player, ask them for examples of working with teams, or have you ever been on a team where you've had to work with someone really difficult? How did you deal with that, and what happened? But then you've got to scale back if you've got someone who's never actually worked in a workplace before, and try and apply that question that you're going to ask them to maybe university or sports scenarios, so that they do have an example to be able to give you.
That's actually leads into the next question really well, Alex. What are some tips on hiring a Gen Z with no experience? I'm from a small business and I'm concerned I won't have time to train them and that they will lose interest in the role quickly.
You'll lose them, will be my first answer. You have to put time aside to train them. It's part of the reason they're joining your organisation, and I'm so sorry to not give you a positive answer on that one. I'll flip to the others in a second. So definitely test for that real hunger when you're interviewing them. And if they don't have work experience, it's easy to ask some questions around whether they've played sports at school, university, or if they didn't attend university. Group assignments at school are also another really good testing point, but I'll pass over to you guys.
Yeah, I mean, it's slightly loaded for us in that, you know, part of what we do organisation is to make that process better. So happy to talk to that offline and give you some ways of making that easier and less of a burden. But to Alex's point, I think one of the bits of insight from the report was that upskilling and ongoing development is one of the critical components when Gen Z future employees are joining an organisation. So the suggestion would be, look at your broader day, look at what you're doing, and try and ascertain whether there's any opportunity to allocate that time. Because if you don't, to Alex's point, you will lose them. And there's, you know, especially when you're new to the workforce, and especially with this generation, they want to keep that momentum going. So if they've experienced it somewhere else, come and it stops, that's going to be a short tenure, I would suggest. So it's just a way of figuring out how and how you might be able to deliver on that. And certainly the training piece is absolutely something that we can help with. And there's a number of different ways of being able to do that, lots of different platforms. But yeah, the too hard basket is something that I used to hear 10 years ago. I'd be devastated if it was still the case now, but yeah, happy to chat.
And I'd in some of the reading I was doing before today, that Gen Z really value professional experience, even more so over say tertiary education because of a number of reasons, but obviously the debt that they can go into as well, but they really value that. And how can we support that? At the moment, we're a growing organisation. We wouldn't, the stigma that's attached to things like internship and work experience is that it chews a lot of time, that it takes, your people away from doing what they want to be doing day to day. But if you don't invest that time, you aren't going to have those little gems that come through that stay with the business. I know in my previous organisation, for budgetary reasons, we had a lot of interns, and there was, 80% of those were success stories that would remain with the business. And you got to sort of try before you buy, and they would stay and they're engaged for the business from early on. So you've got to invest the time, but I do know the stigma and some of the pains that are attached with things like that as well.
I think, again, and to the point we were talking about earlier, it doesn't need to be this really big professional development plan. I mean, again, with more and more learning experiences happening informally outside of the workplace, sometimes it's as simple as sitting down and thinking, what is it that got me to where I am? What are the blog posts I follow? What are the TED Talks I'm interested in? How can I start them on this learning journey in a low impact way? And if you've got the right technology in place, sharing some of this informal content down to be able to capture just a 18-minute TED Talk or a 5-minute, just to start the momentum of learning. And so it's not as burdensome as on the organisation yourself, as well as the employee, but do something, because nothing will be more detrimental than a new employee sitting there and going, no.
And give them permission to do it at work.
Yeah.
So the TED Talks, the GO1, whatever they're doing, if you give them permission to be doing that at work, you will be so surprised at how quickly they pick up on it and they start to become accountable and they start to just thrive on it themselves.
Cool. We have time, I think, for one more question. We're nearly at 12. We went by very quickly. And this question comes from Emma, who asks, any advice on how to get the best out of integrating multiple generations in one team?
Yeah, so it was interesting because the reading, once again, that I was looking at, and I had a little bit of a different approach to it as well. I was sort of talking about the different generations, personality traits were formed through experiences, right? So, but different people across different generations would have all kinds of different experiences as well. So I was looking at, for example, some of the Gen Z traits that I would say that would more closely sit to what I would say would be my personality than necessarily the generation that I fit into as well. But going back to consulting with your people in that team and what works for them and what they want and how they want to work, as opposed to sort of coming over the top and pretending that, you have all the answers and this will work because you're in a particular generation as well. So that was a little bit on my table. Definitely consult, with your staff or across multiple generations, and you'll be surprised what you come back with. And I think you'll be surprised a lot more how similar they'll be as well.
I mean, I think one of the things that you can absolutely look at, and we used the word empowerment earlier, but I think, whether it's HR or L&D is empowering and working with those sort of different generations to curate experiences and expertise that they've gone through that then can be applied into a sort of professional development setting. And in the same way that you might, consume some design thinking education, actually curating pathways that have been self-built by those different generational representatives to then help inform those other people. And that's a great way, if you've got the right technology in place to actually not just engage the workforce, but capture some of that fantastic IP and then share it quite meaningfully across the organisation. So I think, again, it's that sort of empowerment and engagement word that helps to sort of bring the whole thing to life, because you can bring in data and documents about that kind of, there's a ton of it out there, but that's not always going to apply to your organisation or your industry. So, if you do have that multi-generational representation within your organisation, figure out a way to curate and create a really meaningful experience to get that intellectual property across a lot of the different generations.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, both of you made the point, employee feedback and calling it out. I don't know if you've heard of a book called Radical Candor by Kim Scott, but if you're noticing conflict in your team and you think that's generational, get the design thinking principle out and actually have a team session, just call it out, say, guys, we've got something going on in the team, we're going to break out into groups and do some design thinking to work through the conflicts and how we're going to actually come up with solutions together so that you have ownership and accountability for the team and you're not top down, to Michael's point, you're actually having the team come up with the solutions.
Well, thank you so much, everyone. We actually have a lot of questions that didn't get to be answered. So what I might do is, if the team is okay with it, that we'll answer those offline for everyone and we'll share it in a follow-up post. So if you do have any more questions, keep putting them through, but we just won't be able to answer them today. But yeah, thank you so much for joining us.
Awesome. Thanks
Thank you very
everyone. We
much.
hope you enjoyed it. Have a great day.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.